Okay, welcome everyone to our panel, Russian Language and Study Abroad, Post-2022 Challenges, Regional Perspectives and Colonial Contexts. Today we have an amazing team to present on this topic, a very important, and I think it's a great follow-up to the keynote today. And our first presenters are Graham Hettlinger, American Council for International Education, and Timothy Blauvelt, also American Council for International Education, Ilia State University. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced the last names.
Okay, shall we begin then? Okay, so I will be speaking and then Graham will assist if there are questions and follow-ups. And so our topic is on study abroad for Russian language after 2022, so after the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. And since both Graham and I represent American councils, this is very much from an American perspective, though I think it applies more generally as well. So since the full-scale invasion in early 2022, for the first time since the 1950s, there are no formal US study abroad or exchange programs in Russia. They all stopped. The shock of the invasion drove home the deficit of expertise about the post-Soviet region. And at the same time, it began a reconsideration of how the region is viewed and studied in Western academia. So there were calls to decenter, to decolonize what was usually called Russian and Eurasian studies, and to shift the focus from the perspectives, or shift the focus to the perspectives, experiences, and languages of the non-Russian peoples and republics of the former Russian and Soviet empires. And yet, while this paradigm shift might be somewhat overdue, there is an underlying consensus that the new generations of American students of the region and other foreign students still require competence in Russian, the former imperial tongue. And so scholars, teachers, academic administrators, study abroad professionals have been forced by events to reconsider how to provide the essential language learning and local cultural experience in this new reality of not being able to go to Russia and to administer programs in Russia. The shift of Russian language study programs to other republics of the former Soviet Union, like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, the Baltics, the South Caucasus, already began in the decade before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. State pressures in Russia sometimes made programming in Russia unpredictable. Participants in U.S. government scholarships like the Boren Fellowship, students on ROTC or with military backgrounds, had long had to refrain from travel to Russia because of security concerns. To serve these students and to provide an alternative location for immersion-based intensive Russian study, our organization, American Councils, began partnering with the faculty of the Kazakh National University Department of International Relations to host the Russian Language and Area Studies program there in 2014. During the same year, American Councils relocated the Russian flagship program to Kaznu in partnership with the Department of Philology. We also, for the first time in 2014, relocated from Ufa to Tbilisi, a CLS, Critical Languages scholarship group, for the first time. Yet most study abroad programs continued functioning exclusively in Russia until they were forced to cease with the invasion, resulting in a scramble to relocate and reorient, often with little time to think through the consequences. There are certainly fair criticisms of sending students to study the imperial language of the former colonizer. For many of the non-Russian republics, language was a key issue of national independence movements, and the national languages are central to national identity. Language use in public is as much related to politics as it is to communication. At the same time, despite geopolitics and the ever-increasing popularity of English, Russian remains a lingua franca, or a language of external engagement, for many in the non-Russian republics. The language still has official status in some republics, in Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and most of the non-Russian republics have rich Russophone traditions and heritages of their own. Yet viewing these republics as simply Russian-speaking perpetuates the colonial view that they are merely Russian peripheries, component parts of a Russian-dominated cultural and political sphere, rather than sovereign countries in their own right. This is particularly concerning given the propagandistic efforts of Putin's Russia to lay claim to ownership of the Russian language through Ruski Mir, implying that the Russian language and culture by default determine the legitimate boundaries of the Russian state. This campaign extends beyond just the abstraction of soft power, as, quote, defending the rights of Russian speakers, has been repeatedly used by the Russian state to justify its interference and armed aggression. Such sensitivities must be taken into consideration. One cannot simply relocate an existing Russian language program and attempt to recreate there a replica Russia in miniature. Yet many, it seems, set out to do just that. One Ukrainian colleague bemoaned a program being advertised to potential participants at a major regional studies conference as an opportunity to experience, quote, the width and beauty of the Russian world and the congenial countries of the Baltic, end quote. Yet the students on this program in reality were ashamed to admit that they were there to study Russian and ended up speaking mainly in English. So based on our experience of more than a decade of conducting study abroad programs in the country of the region other than Russia, we would offer the following best practices and recommendations to address these sensitivities and forestall potential problems. As anyone with study abroad experience is well aware, managing expectations is half the battle. The socio-linguistic environment of the host country must be substantially addressed with participants in pre-departure and or in-country orientations so that the participants are fully aware of the context and prepared with strategies for negotiating linguistic interactions in situations they're likely to find themselves in. Like such as beginning interactions with phrases in the local language. For example, when asked by cab drivers and casual acquaintances, "Why are you here?" students would be advised to answer in some form of, "I'm here to learn about your local language and culture, as well as to learn Russian." Further, it's essential for study abroad programs in any non-Russian republic to include a component of instruction in the local language, even if only at an introductory level, ideally with the opportunity to continue further if desired. This shows respect for the host country and its culture and provides the students with the means to engage in basic communication and gain a sense of orientation. That's especially the case in countries that use an alphabet that's different from Latin or Cyrillic. In many of the republics, starting a conversation immediately in Russian can provoke resentment and irritation. And that's really the case in Tbilisi. Whereas at first starting in the local national language, even if hesitatingly, just say hello, can often go a long way to help in overcoming such barriers. In our experience, most participants welcome this exposure to the host republic's language, and every year at least some of them go on to study the language in depth, something that they probably would never even have thought about doing if they had not had this initial exposure on the program. Next, well, general aspects of mainstream Russian culture, poetry, literature, folklore, etc., may be included in the program. This cannot be the sole focus. Again, it would, in our opinion, be a mistake to attempt to pretend to be in Russia. Very often, the local Russian language teaching professionals themselves come from and represent the specific Russophone cultural heritage of the Republic and can serve as an excellent resource. They can also offer a valuable opportunity to remind students that the Russian language is larger than Russian itself and exists in a growing number of organic forms outside, as our keynote speaker discussed, so independent of the Russian state. At the same time, aspects of the local culture should also be highlighted. Literature, the arts, cuisine. Similarly, content, lectures, museums and gallery visits, performances, meetings with experts and cultural figures should be included to convey the local perspective on the historical context and the urgent social, cultural, and political issues of the day, even if this has to be provided in English or through translation. Study abroad programs usually strive for a balance between immersive language opportunity and area knowledge content. It is a particular challenge to provide both of these for participants at the beginner or intermediary language levels, which is typical for American study abroad students. This can be even more difficult in an environment where the use of the target language may be fraught with social and cultural implications. The usual tools of language study abroad programs can create crucial communication opportunities in the target language. So homestay families, conversation partners, organized cultural activities and excursions. Organizing these things in the non-Russian Republic sometimes requires considerably more effort and staff time than they might otherwise do in Russia. Yet in many of the locations where the students study, they are essential to create safe spaces for language practice. In addition, we found it, particularly in Georgia, helpful to create shared cloud documents of safe spaces where Russian is commonly spoken. Russian language cafes, bookstores, co-working spaces, pub quizzes, comedy, improv, music venues that the participants can themselves contribute to and update. Ultimately, well, Russian language study and even language immersion can be the central component of a study abroad programs in the non-Russian republics. To be successful, they must be broader than simply Russian language programs. And while this presents a range of additional challenges, it also offers potential unique benefits for participants. Learning to navigate multilingual and minority language environments and to negotiate language use in places where the choice of what language to speak can have political implications is an immediately important professional skill. Such experience of functioning in a multilingual environment can provide insights to the larger phenomenon of language use and choices in Eurasia and elsewhere in the world. And this is a challenge that students from English-speaking backgrounds are rarely required to contemplate. So we think what could otherwise be a bug in the system can be a plus. So I'll stop with that and we'll be happy to continue the discussion if there are any questions.
And I was going to add just a couple of footnotes to Tim's presentation. So we have a couple of minutes focused mostly on the idea of working with students in these environments. I work primarily on the Russian flagship program, which is at KazNU in the Philfac, and also with the Russian language and area studies program, which is in Almaty as well at KazNU, and also in Tbilisi, Georgia, Tallinn, Estonia, Yerevan, Armenia, and Forsyth, sorry, in Tbilisi, Georgia, of course. The thing I wanted to sort of mention is all of our programs currently provide about 20 hours of instruction, and they include up to 2 or 3 hours a week in host country language instruction to address the kind of point that Tim was talking about, as well as courses in the host country culture and history. One of the things that I think is interesting to note is just that if students today, I think, look for this. I think most students come into these programs very aware of the issues of speaking Russian outside Russia and are looking for advice and guidance on how to go about using Russian in ways that are respectful and appropriate. And so even if I think our programs weren't offering the kinds of things that they do, students would be seeking that because they do come into the program very sensitive to the issues of Russian being spoken outside of Russia. What students often lack, and what strikes me, is this ability to kind of observe quietly what's going on around them. And in this way, I think they're not unlike the rest of us because we all tend to be staring at our phones rather than sort of watching what's happening. But students, I find, are particularly kind of underprepared and unaware of that skill. And one of the things we talk to them a lot about is just thinking a little bit about what's happening around you, paying attention to what language other people are speaking, how people are reacting to you, how people are interacting with one another before you begin to sort of interact, to stand back and watch and observe. And this is something that I just wanted to mention because I think the more they hear about this from faculty before they go on programs like this, the more aware they are of that ability. It's something we talk a lot about in orientation, but it's something I think that students need to hear about sooner and more comprehensively because it's to us it's a kind of obvious skill, but it's one that these students really seem to lack. Often the students whom I think are best suited for these programs are students who study anthropology because it seems to be one of the only disciplines that still talks about observation and standing back with a certain degree of detachment and watching what's going around you. So the kind of anthropological disposition is something that I think really benefits students on these programs. The other thing that I think it's just really helpful to talk to students about in this regard is the point that Tim made as well. But that's just that this is the kind of skill that when you talk about the global workplace and creating global professionals, this is the kind of thing that employers are looking for. And students are often, I think, not in a place to really articulate the kind of skills they're gaining from these programs. And it's really helpful for them to have advisors who remind them of this fact that your experience navigating this kind of complex linguistic cultural environment is precisely the kind of thing that employers are looking for. This is the kind of skill people talk about when they say being able to work in an environment where there are multiple conflicting viewpoints and multiple cultures and viewpoints that you may find abrasive, and how you manage to work effectively with people across difference. And again, this is an ideal environment for students to develop that skill, but they aren't always aware of it. And so the more I think we talk to them about that, they can begin to see these kinds of richer environments in a way as a real a plus, a real strength to the program, rather than a minus. The only other thing I just wanted to add really briefly is that from our research on these programs in terms of language gain, do not show a decrease in language acquisition in Russian gain. The gains that we see when we measure are as strong or slightly stronger than what we saw when we were running the immersion programs in Russian. So it's also interesting that students still come out with very high gains in reading, listening, and speaking skills when they go on these programs. Thanks. I just wanted to add those comments briefly.
Thank you, Graham. And I just wanted to add, when I was teaching at the study abroad program at Nazarbayev University in Astana, I used to ask students as a homework assignment to go somewhere crowded and just to listen, eavesdrop on the conversation and bring me a dialogue or something that they hear. But back then I didn't realize that about their lack of the ability to observe quietly. I think this is so profound. Thank you for sharing this. I'm definitely keeping that in mind for the future. Okay, now we move on to our next presenter, Gigla Джинджолия. Again, I apologize if I put the stress on the wrong syllable. Yeah, о положении русского языка в Грузии. Very interesting.
Так, дорогие коллеги, тема моего доклада «Русский язык в Грузии» по данным социолингвистического опроса. Там будут цифры, поэтому мне бы хотелось показать презентацию. Я сейчас подключусь. Есть, да? Так, спасибо. Конечно, цифры всегда условные, но тем не менее, я буду опираться на те данные, которые я получил, и, честно говоря, они были для меня неожиданными и новыми для меня. Итак, будет интересно обсудить, какова роль русского языка в Грузии, является ли он в настоящее время востребованным, в каких сферах используется, какие функции выполняет и так далее. И вот я провел опрос. Опрос проводился с октября. Ага, все, понятно, все. Анкета была оформлена на двух языках, русском и грузинском, и общее количество респондентов, которые участвовали в вопросе, всего 714 человек, среди которых 329 человек – это лица мужского пола, и 385 человек – это лица женского пола, которые проживают в разных регионах Грузии. И количество респондентов по возрастным группам вы можете видеть на экране. Я таким образом сэкономлю время. Итак, до 29 лет это 164 человека, от 30 до 49 лет это 386 человек, и от 50 лет и старше тоже 164 человека. И сама по себе анкета, она включала 3 группы вопросов. Первая группа, это паспортные данные. Далее вторая группа – это ментальные и субъективные вопросы, знание языков, родной язык, язык, на котором респондент думает, и другие. И третья группа вопросов – вопросы, указывающие на выбор языка в типовой сфере и в ситуации общения. Общение в семье, с друзьями и так далее, государственные учреждения, межнациональное общение, чтение газет и журналов, поиск информации в интернете и так далее. Ну вот, перейдем теперь непосредственно к вопросам анкеты и к результатам, которые я получил. Первый вопрос: какой язык вы считаете родным? Вот эта анкета на грузинском языке. Мы можем видеть, что на первом месте грузинский язык 71%, далее грузинский и русский языки 25, чуть более 25%, и далее идет русский язык 5,6%. Ну, эти данные анкеты на грузинском языке отличаются от анкеты, которые мы, от данных анкеты на русском языке. Ну вот сейчас мы можем видеть эту разницу. Здесь уже в анкете на русском языке результаты анкеты такие. На первом месте здесь оказывается сразу два языка, грузинский и русский, 47, ну, чуть более 47%. Далее следует грузинский язык, 43,7%, и русский язык на третьем месте. Таким образом, здесь в анкете на русском языке на первом месте оказывается грузинский и русский языки, то есть такое сочетание. Всего ответов в категории родной язык, вот результаты такие. Грузинский язык на первом месте, около 58%. Далее следует сочетание грузинский и русский языки, 36%. Ну, на третьем месте русский язык, около 6%, и другие языки, это около 0,4%. Надо сказать, что в категории родной язык во всех возрастных группах на первом месте грузинский язык, что ожидаемо, но я думал, что цифры будут, конечно, повыше. Грузинский язык в сочетании с русским языком, то есть два родных языка, выбрали 36% респондентов, и только русский язык в качестве родного назвали около 6% респондентов. В зависимости от возраста в этой категории, в категории родной язык, показатели следующие. В возрастной группе до 29 лет грузинский язык является родным для, если брать только респондентов, только данной, число респондентов этой возрастной группы, то 63%. А всего, если взять всех респондентов, от общего числа респондентов, то 14%. Далее следует грузинский язык в сочетании с русским языком, и 31% респондент от числа респондентов данной возрастной группы. В скобках указаны проценты от числа респондентов данной возрастной группы. И далее следует русский язык, около 6%. В возрастной группе, я прошу прощения, в возрастной группе от 30 до 49 лет, даже на первом месте здесь грузинский язык, 52,3 от числа общего числа респондентов данной возрастной группы. Далее следует грузинский язык 39,4 и русский язык 2,6%. Другие языки 0,7%. Далее возрастная группа от 50 лет и старше. Здесь грузинский язык родным считают 65,2% респондентов данной возрастной группы. Далее следует грузинский и русский языки, сочетание такое 33%, и русский язык 1,8% всех респондентов данной возрастной категории. Надо сказать, что грузинский язык чаще называют родным младшей и старшей возрастной группах. И респонденты, назвавшие грузинский язык родным, в семье используют только грузинский язык, 17% респондентов. Грузинский и русский языки, хотя они назвали родным грузинский язык, 28% респондентов. Грузинский язык с отдельными русскими словами. То есть такая смешанная русско-грузинская речь. 5% респондентов и комбинации есть мигрельский язык, грузинский язык, менее 1%, и грузинский и английский языки также менее 1%. Сравнительно небольшое влияние на выбор родного языка оказывает пол респондентов. Некоторое преобладание грузинского языка как родного заметно у женщин, 34%. Реже грузинский язык как родной называют мужчины. И два языка, русский и грузинский, родными считают 15% женщин, респонденток, и 23% мужчин. И что же касается русского языка как родного, то разница в выборе русского языка как родного, она незначительна. Женщины 3% и мужчины 2,5%. Следующий вопрос анкеты – первый язык, то есть язык, на котором ребенок начинает говорить. И здесь данные меня тоже удивили очень, потому что первым языком назвали грузинский и русский языки, 67% респондентов. Грузинский язык здесь на втором месте, 26%. То есть эти показатели не совпадают с данными по родному языку, которые демонстрируют значительное преобладание грузинского языка как родного. И показатели русского языка как первого и как родного полностью здесь совпадают по 6%. Следующий вопрос анкеты – это вопрос о том, на каком языке думают респонденты. Вот результаты. Большинство респондентов, более 60%, утверждает, что думает на грузинском и русском языках в зависимости от ситуации, хотя значительная часть этих респондентов своим родным языком называют грузинский язык. То есть вот язык обучения в школе, грузинский и русский язык. Грузинский язык 51% респондентов, русский язык 49%. Но школьный язык может не совпадать ни с родным языком матери, ни с домашним языком, как пишет Земская. Так, 13% респондентов учились или учатся в школе с русским языком обучения, хотя в качестве родного языка матери они указывают грузинский язык. А 6% респондентов в школе учились с грузинским языком обучения, но их материнский язык русский. Надо сказать, что асимметрия между языком обучения в школе и первым языком не характерна. Наша анкета фиксирует только 6 таких случаев. У 5 респондентов первым языком был грузинский язык, но они учились в школе с русским языком обучения. А один респондент учился в школе с грузинским языком обучения, хотя его первым языком является русский язык. 16% респондентов, назвавшие в качестве первого языка комбинацию русский и грузинский языки, по параметру языка обучения в школе распределены практически равномерно, с очень незначительным перевесом менее 1% в пользу школ с грузинским языком обучения. Так, выбор языка. Так, сейчас минутку, извините. Следующее. Домашний язык. Половина респондентов указывает, что в семье используют как грузинский, так и русский языки. Широко распространены различные формы смешения этих языков. Мы видим это мы видим на этой таблице, вот здесь русский и грузинский язык дома используют 50% респондентов, только грузинский 20%. И только русские 0,8% респондентов. Следующее, выбор языка в общении с друзьями. В этой категории следующие результаты. Наши респонденты в общении с друзьями чаще всего обращаются к двум языкам, грузинскому и русскому. Грузинскому с русскими лексическими вкраплениями, реже русскому с элементами грузинской лексики. Ну, эти показатели, они схожи с данными о выборе языка в СМС-сообщениях, электронных письмах, адресованных друзьям и знакомым. Выбор языка в магазине, транспорте, на рынке. Здесь на первом месте оказывается комбинация грузинский и русский языки, то есть 49% респондентов. Далее следует грузинский язык, 39%, и 10% респондентов используют грузинский язык с отдельными русскими словами, и около 1% респондентов на русском языке говорят с отдельными грузинскими словами, и менее 1% на русском языке. Русский язык используется в государственных учреждениях, но доминирующим языком, конечно же, является грузинский язык. Этот вариант ответа выбрали 59% респондентов. На русском языке в государственных учреждениях обращаются только 3% респондентов. И 37% респондентов используют два языка, русский и грузинский языки. И эти данные отличаются по возрастному параметру. Есть различия. В категории выбор языка межнационального общения во всех трех возрастных группах преобладает русский язык. Более 79% респондентов назвали русский язык языком межнационального общения. 14% респондентов используют грузинский язык. Английский язык, а также комбинации английский и русский, грузинский, английский и русский назвали 6% респондентов. А другие языки около 1% респондентов. Английский язык чаще всего называют младшей возрастной группе, чуть более 4%. В средней возрастной группе английский язык используется уже в 2 раза реже, а в старшей его использование сокращается в 3 раза по сравнению с младшей группой. Заметны различия в использовании грузинского языка как языка межнационального общения. Например, в возрасте до 29 лет это 12% респондентов, от 30 до 49 лет 9%, и от 50 лет и старше 2%. Таким образом, доля грузинского языка увеличивается от старшей группы через среднюю к младшей. Это может означать укрепление в этой роли, в этой позиции грузинского языка в будущем. Я ошибся, извините. Использование язык, на котором респонденты предпочитают смотреть фильмы, телевизионные программы и так далее. Здесь хочу отметить, что большинство респондентов выбирают два языка, грузинский и русский языки. Это самый распространенный ответ. Выбор языка для поиска информации в интернете. Мы видим, что ответы респондентов распределились следующим образом. Здесь сочетание языков русский и грузинский, грузинский и английский языки. Далее следует грузинский язык 8%, и только на русском языке 5% респондентов. Таким образом, подведем итоги. Данные проведенного опроса свидетельствуют о высокой социальной активности русского языка в Грузии. В категории «родной язык» преобладает грузинский язык, однако наряду с грузинским языком в качестве родного респонденты называют и русский язык. Более 50% респондентов читают газеты и журналы и ищут информацию в интернете, смотрят фильмы и телепередачи на грузинском языке в сочетании с русским языком. Неофициальные коммуникации, общение в семье, с друзьями, соседями и так далее, широко распространен смешанный русско-грузинский язык в русском или русский язык в грузинском. Русский язык Грузии оказался востребованным в качестве языка межнационального общения. Спасибо большое.
Спасибо большое, было очень интересно. И мне особенно было интересно было бы сравнить с казахстанскими цифрами. Наверное, такое исследование есть, я поищу, было бы интересно сравнить. Okay, I have my presentation in English, and I'm going to share my slides now. Okay. So thank you everyone for being here today. And I'm Aselle. And I teach at the University of. And for 5 years, or 5 times, I've had the privilege of designing and teaching a course called Intercultural Introduction to Kazakhstan, which is a 1-credit seminar that prepares Russian flagship students for study abroad in Almaty. I also taught in Astana at Nazarbayev University in their summer study abroad program, which stopped when pandemic happened, and they're trying to revive it, but I'm not sure what will happen to it, if it's going to be open this year. The Kazakh program is there, but the Russian program not yet, but they have a contract with Middlebury College, so in some form it exists this day. And today I'd like to talk about why it's not only useful, but absolutely essential to understand Kazakhstan's local context, its cultural history, and especially its complex relationship with the Russian language, before sending students there to study abroad. In doing so, I'll also reflect on what's worked and what's been more challenging when it comes to helping students build real intercultural competence in a post-colonial setting. Let's begin. Let's begin with what I sometimes call the inconvenient question, one that inevitably comes up when we talk about studying abroad in post-Soviet spaces, and I specifically bracket post-Soviet because sometimes we don't like to use this term. And that question is, are we asking students to go abroad and study the language of the colonizer? Spoiler alert, yes. As educators, we often celebrate immersion and language gains, but we also must grapple with more uncomfortable reality that our students are often learning the language of the former or even present colonizer in places that are still negotiating the past. And yeah, the answer, of course, is yes, but it's not that simple. Russian remains lingua franca across much of Central Asia, including Kazakhstan. It is a crucial tool for communication, for diplomacy, for education, and yes, for navigating day-to-day life of study abroad. But it also carries the weight of history, of colonization, repression, and cultural erasure. And so in my years of teaching, I often found myself at crossroads. How do I prepare students to learn Russian in Kazakhstan without replicating colonial mentalities? Because what I noticed in the teaching of Russian here in the United States, teachers sometimes, or the programs, Russian textbooks, everything falls into this mentality of teaching the greatest language in the world. Yes, and how do we give our students the tools to navigate this complexity thoughtfully? So this is where the course comes in. Yes, it's a short 1-credit seminar, but it plays a vital role in shaping how students understand where they're going and why it matters. And in our program here, students go either for study for summer or for the entire capstone year in Almaty. And in today's talk, I want to share what I've learned from teaching this course 5 times. I'll address the main questions. What should we prioritize in the syllabus given time constraints? Which topics spark the most? How can we effectively approach challenging topics like colonization? What strategies help students build the true cultural flexibility, not just curiosity? Yes. Okay. Here's the screenshot from my syllabus. So yes, when we try to create a course like this, or even if we talk about a general Russian language course, and if we want to include some content on the countries where Russian is spoken, I think it's important to ask why and to make sure our students understand why it's happening there. Why Kazakhstan? Why are they going to Kazakhstan to study Russian? Why Russian? Why now? And because Kazakhstan is often perceived as Russia adjacent, but it's crucial that students understand its distinct history, language politics, and evolving independent identity. And despite being a post-colonial state, Russian remains a major language of education. And for American students, this might create a dissonance. They come to Kazakhstan to improve their Russian, but many aren't aware of the cultural and historical weight that Russian carries. And the course, the Intercultural Introduction to Kazakhstan, is built around 14 modules. Because it's a 1-credit seminar, so we can meet only once a week. This is not a lot at all. And so I have to pick topics very carefully. The seminar covers geography, history, society, youth culture, and practical preparation for life in the country. And the overarching goals are to build cultural and historical awareness, encourage critical engagement with colonial legacies, support language development through written reflections in Russian, because this seminar is taught entirely in Russian, and foster intercultural flexibility and openness. Yes, so what do we cover? Yes, one thing is that we need to understand the history of what is Kazakhstan today and how did we come to this. We start with Kazakh nomadic culture, then we move through the Tsarist and Soviet periods, including Stalinist repressions, the famine, Semipalatinsk nuclear tests. And these units introduce students to the trauma that's still embedded in cultural memory, which is critical for understanding Kazakh-Russian relations today. We discuss how Russian functions as a tool of access and exclusion, and how Kazakh language revitalization efforts have emerged in response. Students read about the alphabet reform, watch videos about linguistic shifts and subcultures, explore how language and identity intersect in daily life. And this helps them, well, I hope, them questions assumptions like, everyone in Kazakhstan speaks Russian. Or, for example, in academia today, you can hear often, Kazakhstan is a Russian-speaking country. This is extremely a problematic statement, which can be well, it can offend people in Kazakhstan, some of people in Kazakhstan, if you say that. Or worse, Kazakh is not important. I'm coming to Kazakhstan to learn Russian. This is not important. So we're trying to challenge that. Modules on youth culture, urban life, and activism expose students to feminism and LGBTQ+ movements and the situation there in Kazakhstan. social taboos, like the phenomenon of uyat, for example, and decolonial critiques in literature, film, and architecture. And I think, personally, I think there's so much fascinating things happening in Kazakhstan today that just will boost interest in students. Yes, and these discussions push students beyond surface level appreciation into areas of critical empathy, seeing Kazakhstan as living and dynamic society, not just, you know, a space where you learn Russian. So what resonates with most students? Well, actually, yes. Without a doubt, they're most engaged when they can connect history to the present. For example, when we discuss Soviet era language policy, and then we watch clips of young Kazakhs today debating whether they should speak Russian or Kazakh, and it clicks. Suddenly, it's not abstract to them. Some topics spark immediate engagement. Students love, for example, comparing Almaty and Astana, or learning Kazakh idioms. And others, especially those tied to colonial trauma, are hardened to navigate. For example, how do we talk about Soviet era famine in a way that's not voyeuristic? How do we discuss Islam in Kazakhstan, or just religious relationships, or whatever, without oversimplifying? How do we acknowledge that our students are benefiting from colonial legacies, even as we critique them? Because I often say that our students, as representatives of, well, they're coming from United States, from what we call West, and they learn Russian, so there is double responsibility. Let's phrase it this way. Yes, and this is where the structured reflection comes in. I ask my students to write short weekly responses in Russian, forcing them to process complex material in a second language and begin articulating the position. And I personally think that maybe teaching this seminar in English would be more beneficial, but there's so much that they can do. Yes, navigating difficult topics. So talking about colonization is hard. There's no getting around it. Some students come in with a very language as a neutral tool mindset, and well, they're surprised and sometimes unsettled to learn that Russian can carry colonial weight in certain contexts. And as a person, as a representative of Kazakhstan, my ancestry survived the famine and repressions and everything. So I try to model a lot of things and trying to share personal narrative as well. And I ask my students to ask questions and to encourage students to emphasize that cultural competence is not about getting it right? It's about the complexity and the ability to listen. And one of the time, I definitely agree with Graham that the ability to observe is very important. And strategies, well, yes, this is the end of my presentation. So lastly, let's talk about strategies. Beyond content, how do we cultivate the kind of mindset students need to succeed abroad? I use a mix of reflective journaling in those responses, guided discussions, and scenario-based exercises. They write, and they're given the choice of prompts that they can reflect on. It's like more like a blog posts. But also in class, we go through scenarios. This is a situation. How would you handle it? So yes, and I think the benefit of these scenarios are that they're not just hypotheticals, but they're practicing these situations. Okay, so what I try to emphasize in this, in my approach to preparation for Kazakhstan is starting with local, not the imperial. So students begin with pre-Russian times, like Kazakhstan nomadic roots, not the Russian conquest. This grounds them in Kazakh agency, using discomfort productively, right? Because if they're confused or challenged, that's the best time to start the conversation around the contested history. And today, in today's political situation, when the history is a tool that's being molded according to certain agenda, is important. Bringing multiple voices, I invite guests, well, via Zoom, of course, but from Kazakhstan, materials from Kazakh journalists, artists, and academics that help students to move beyond the tourist gaze. And even, especially if they go for a year, yeah, that's important. And making it personal, I already said that, but we spend time on practical topics, renting apartments, going to the doctor, situation in buses, and this makes Kazakhstan a real place, not a geopolitical case study. So that's about the seminar, but I guess what I see it as my mission to teach students going beyond the Russian textbook. I taught Russian language for 9 years now, and I think that sometimes the picture that we build in the classroom of the Russian language is very limited to certain tropes and stereotypes. But having these seminars is essential, and I wish that more institutions in the United States and beyond who send their students to Kazakhstan, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, or wherever Russian is spoken, but having this short seminar is a first step to bettering the situation. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. I think we're ready to open the floor for discussion. Yes, Shannon.
Hi, thank you everyone for your presentations. I have a question for you, Aselle. You said, I wanted to ask you about, you said students come in with a mindset of language is a neutral tool, and you talked about, and that's really important, you talked about how you use your personal history to help them try to maybe break out of that mindset. And I wondered if you had any advice for those of us who might want to introduce Kazakhstan to our students or other places as well, and would like to similarly help them see past that mindset of language being only a neutral tool, but don't personally have a history there. Do you have any suggestions for texts or, particular things that we might be able to use in that situation?
That's yes. So what? Okay. There is no one single textbook that would answer this question. So it's more about the set of materials, right? And it depends what countries you're talking about. So because I know Kazakhstan, I can speak only about Kazakhstan. I think I can recommend couple books.
Yeah, and when I said text, I meant not necessarily like a textbook, but like any kind of, article or video or anything.
Yeah. Okay, so if we talk about traumatic experiences, I think I really love Atomic Step by Tolzhan Kasenova, and I think we invited when I taught this summer in Middlebury College the graduate seminar on decolonial theories and practices. We invited Tolzhan Kasenova to talk about nuclear testing in Semipalatinsk, and she gave presentation in Russian because it's a school of Russian, but it was magnificent. And her book itself is translated into Russian, and it's written in English, and now it's translated into Kazakh. It gives a clear understanding of what's happening in terms of raw numbers, like statistics, but also she interviewed many people. It gives there are testimonials, direct victims of the testings. Inviting her, I think students loved her lecture because of her very sincere, authentic, style, but also just the book is written perfectly. And so we put her talk in dialogue with Mariana Bujerin and her book Inheriting the Bomb about the Ukrainian nuclear legacy that's left after collapse of Soviet Union. And it was the same week. So this way students had unique opportunity to connect the dots, right? Because the main question Mariana asked, when Soviet Union collapsed, Kazakhstan and Ukraine were left very big amount of nuclear weapons. If they trusted the West, right, that if they give up, they will be safe. But if they kept the nuclear, would there be war today? Probably. Well, it's a difficult question. So this is an interesting guest, I think, to invite. But inviting more voices from the space. That's the way.
Thank you.
Yes, Graham.
Thanks, Aselle. I just wanted to ask you a couple of technical questions about your course. I'm very interested in it, and you may have already mentioned this. I apologize, but you said you teach it in English, but they write in Russian. Is that right?
No, it's taught entirely in Russian. So
it's taught entirely in Russian. Okay, great. And is it required for students going on flagship or study abroad?
Yes, it is a requirement.
For both of those? For both groups?
For capstone, it is required, but I think for the summer study abroad, it's not a requirement. It's optional.
Thanks. That's really interesting. Thanks.
So I think it would be really amazing to have a whole semester to prepare students, even if it's only a 1-credit seminar. I mean, usually in the context of study abroad programs, if we have any time at all, maybe an hour in an orientation program that also has to include basic things about how to eat, how to not get hit by a car, how to not touch dogs, cultural shock and adaptation and all those things with students who are usually already pretty tired to begin with. So it's a real challenge, I think, to try to convey those things, which I think are absolutely essential.
Yeah. Maya.
1 second. Thank you so much for everyone for organizing such a useful discussion. I represent Oberlin College, and I want to bring to our attentions for some of you who are old enough or long time in the field to remember that before COVID hit us, before the beginning of the war, we were talking a lot about study abroad, about the necessity to teach our students how to observe different culture, how to create dialogue, how to use certain techniques to prepare them. So we were really doing well, going in depth and preparing students. That's one thing. And another thing, as a community of educators in the United States, people abroad, and yes, it was mostly Russia, but it was some schools around Russia. I can give example of Daugavpils, old enough to continue this level of education that we never sent. Our students started to go to Daugavpils after the war, after Russian possibilities were closed. So what I'm seeing here, we not only I like what Tim said in his presentation. You call it unexpected linguistic benefit. I would say it's unexpected, not only linguistic, but very deep effect if we as a community can come together, discuss, maybe have more conferences, or maybe don't call it big conference, but seminars, and learn from each other. What I want to tell you, and you probably know about it, but most programs in the United States, Russian programs, going through significant changes. And it's only transition from Russian program one way or another, but to program which we call RIS, changing of content, different level of communication with students, administration, and so on, so on. So we can't just send students abroad or stop them. They choose where to go depending on what is going on campus. I noticed a lot of changes from all major study abroad organizations. I like to be in touch with them. I like to learn what you're doing. I like what you support students, because students go abroad or don't go abroad for many different reasons. From what I see as an instructor on campus and in the language classroom, some students are afraid to go and they choose available programs in the US. Some students ready to go anywhere. They're not afraid, they're fearless, but they don't have money. So they need financial support. And something that Greg mentioned, that we see in our program in Oberlin, we see this amazing effect. Yes, we low in numbers, but our students absolutely wonderful. They all very strong, very motivated, and God knows what's gonna happen next. So we definitely live in the history. And because of that, we need to communicate. Well, we all don't have time. It's understandable, but we need to make this communication, observation, if not regular, once in a year. So we need to learn what's happening and what all of us doing. That was my 2 cents. Thank you so much. It was very, very useful presentation.
Any other questions?
Может, я задам вопрос Батане Гигле? Что интересно насчет вашего опроса. Через какую платформу вы проводили свой опрос? И как вы набрали своих респондентов? И насколько репрезентативная ваша выборка респондентов? Так что, мне кажется, этой цифрой насчет употребления русского языка, обучения на русском языке, мне кажется, немножко преувеличенной. Это, я хотел бы, чтобы это были такие высокие цифры, но мне кажется, это не совсем соответствует той Грузии, где я живу, мне кажется.
Спасибо большое за ответ, за вопрос. Слышно меня, да? Да. Спасибо большое за ответ. Ну, я вообще сам отношусь очень так с сомнением вообще к цифрам и не склонен абсолютизировать цифры. И тем более, что я сам прекрасно вижу, что, например, во-первых, на какой платформе осуществлялся на основе на сбор материалов, это платформа Survio. Это Survio, это чешская такая платформа, которая позволяет осуществить такие вот такие онлайн-анкетирования, позволяет осуществить. Честно говоря, конечно же, я прекрасно понимаю и я знаю, я вижу, что вот эта анкета, она меня самого поразила в том смысле, что там ну вот, к сожалению, очень мало оказалось представленными, ведь Грузия сама многонациональная страна, многонациональная, и вот в этой анкете я не увидел этого, меня это очень поразило. Там есть люди, которые говорят на самых разных языках, и я этого не увидел, мне это было очень удивительно. Ну, в общем, я хочу сказать, что, конечно, нужно проводить более такой, наверное, эта цифра 714 у меня респондентов. Эта цифра, я думаю, что это недостаточно. Нужно, я думаю, что осуществлять такую, может быть, даже не комбинировать, наверное, и онлайн-анкетирование, и я думаю, что нужно такое полевое, что называется, полевое такое изучение этой темы. То есть уже на месте говорить с людьми, беседовать с ними, причем в разных регионах, и тогда картина, может быть, будет лучше. Мне кажется, что я абсолютно не склонен абсолютизировать эти данные, которые я получил по многим причинам. Во-первых, они меня самого удивили. И мне захотелось, честно говоря, оказаться на месте, там уже говорить с людьми и заниматься сбором материала уже на месте. Я думаю, что нужно проводить такой сбор материала в самых разных регионах Грузии, и на Западе, и на Востоке, и везде, везде, в малых городах и везде. Это должны быть тысячи, я думаю, что респондентов, и только тогда картина может быть полнее. И я тоже удивлен, честно говоря, некоторым результатом полученным, но я должен был посчитать каждого респондента и назвать каждого респондента. Но у меня есть еще данные по такому переключению с одного языка на другой. И очень большой такой корпус, общий объем, наверное, насчитывает около 500 страниц. Я, к сожалению, не мог это сегодня представить, такого смешения языков. Причем это группы, для которых, в общем, где родным языком они считают три языка. Три языка. Например, это так грузинский в первую очередь, дальше идет иверский или мигрельский язык, и русский язык тоже используют. И очень интересно такое взаимодействие, переход с одного языка на другой. И у меня есть очень большой объем материала, и я надеюсь, что, ну, я думаю, что, может быть, еще мне удастся собрать, но корпус текстов таких переходов с одного языка на другой, смешение одного языка с другим, ну, поразительный. И мне бы хотелось этим заняться в ближайшее время. Так что спасибо вам огромное за вопрос. И вы подтвердили, честно говоря, я никогда не сомневался в том, что всякие цифры, они, конечно, нельзя им абсолютизировать цифры. И нужно смотреть все-таки на вещи, как сказать, нужны более какие-то данные для таких заключений. Спасибо большое за вопрос. Очень интересно.
Спасибо. Вопрос от Илоны, я думаю. Илона, вы с нами?
Я с вами. Просто хотела включить видео. Здравствуйте. Я хочу сказать, Гигла, вам то же самое, что я вам написала. Просто вы мне не ответили. И я хочу продолжить эту тему. Я не то чтобы согласна, и категорически просто заявить сейчас. Тим очень близко живет от офиса, и, может быть, очень мало ездит. Потом на автобусе или на метро, может быть, но в транспорте и в магазине батону Гигла нигде не используют русский язык. Никто. Я вам написала, даже русские, украинцы и белорусы, релоканты, эмигранты, не знаю, кто хотите, они предпочитают языке. Поверьте, это именно так.
Спасибо вам большое за замечание. Я абсолютно вам верю. Просто я не мог не отразить данные опроса в этом результаты, не мог это не представить, не мог это не представить. Но я только опирался на то, что мне удалось собрать. Это был онлайн-опрос. Спасибо вам огромное за замечание, и я очень рад, что вот эта тема вызвала такой живой интерес. Я очень благодарен на самом деле, и это будет только способствовать тому, что как-то к этой теме я еще буду возвращаться. Спасибо большое вам. Очень приятно, очень приятно. Спасибо.
Спасибо и вам.
Есть еще вопросы, комментарии? Yeah, I want to go back because we have 10 minutes to Shannon's question, and I just remembered another episode from the seminar that I taught in Middlebury, Shannon, about personal narratives and how to, if you're not from the region, how to approach this. And we had a peculiar and I mean, very interesting situation in classroom. We were talking about colonization in Kazakhstan, and the purpose of that seminar was to draw connections between different groups in the world and how they process colonization, etc., etc. And when we were talking about Kazakhstan and then Uzbekistan, Central Asian countries, a student, surprisingly for us teachers, she shared a story from her own life. She's from Georgia, Atlanta, and I don't remember exactly why, but it reminded her of her own experience when she discovered that her ancestors were slave owners, and how she saw a picture in some archives, and then it was her great-great-grandmother, and then she started to dig in, and then the absolutely geographically far places spurred interest in her own relationship with the big topics of colonization, slavery, etc., etc. And I think that's what in academia, we often isolate ourselves in one, like, oh, this is the country, and this is their experience, and this is their unique history. But when we talk about global terms, we can always find our stories and our relationship to these bigger traumas. And I'm not sure, like, if I answered your question first time, and then if I'm answering it right now, but this is how, like, I feel, but I can't really formulate my answer. Just remember things.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I wondered about we're talking about colonization of language, but we never mentioned that English is also a colonizing language. And students don't think about that, but maybe that's something that can be part of the conversation when we talk about this topic. Looking at another place can help them maybe see their own place in a different way.
Yeah, certainly. Okay.
I absolutely agree with Shannon, because in the UK we have a similar situation, because we have the Welsh and the Gaelic for Scottish and Irish, who are actually where English was English were colonizers, and English is dominating, and Welsh is doing a lot of work for the survival of the language, and Scottish actually are losing the Gaelic. Not a lot of people speak it. They do, but not as much. So that's why that example is excellent, and it does work.
Thank you, Natalia. Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, I think we can call it the end of our panel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.